It's time for another episode of Gospel Preaching Live, brought to you by the Kearney Church of Christ, which meets at 406 North Clark in Kearney, Missouri. Make plans to come out and visit the brethren, who look forward to seeing you. And now the host of Gospel Preaching Live, Richard Dodson.
Hi, friends. My name is Richard Dodson. I'm minister of the Kearney Church of Christ. Church of Christ is located in Kearney, Missouri, and each Sunday evening at 6 p.m., we try to bring you a message from God's Word. We also try to come back on Thursday evenings at 7 p.m. and do likewise. And we pray that you will find these messages to be edifying and in accordance with God's Word. If you find anything that you question or would like to make a suggestion, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, then go ahead and leave those suggestions or comments in the comments section. If you are listening through some other means, you can call or text me at 816-686-9517, 816-686-9517, keeping in mind I am in the Central Time Zone. You can also email me at gospelpreachinglive@gmail.com. That's gospelpreachinglive@gmail.com. And I would sure love to hear from you. If you like this message, please give us a like and make sure that you share this with as many people as possible so that you can assist us in taking this message around the world via the internet and through the other means that we use to publish this broadcast. Okay, this evening's lesson is going to be about Jesus, as I had wrote down on the intro to the show. And what we're going to talk about today is Jesus being the man of sorrows. Now, this is not something that's fun to speak on. In fact, it causes great pain to go through some of these verses. But I think it's something that we need to do in order to be able to have a better understanding of what Jesus went through. Now, when we're thinking about Jesus as the man of sorrows, we're thinking about how he's identified. If you've ever been to any type of, have to do any official business with the government, such as the DMV, you've been asked to provide two sources or two forms of identification. And that's so that they know who you are. And of course, Jesus had a problem with the Jews. He was sent to the Jews, but yet they didn't recognize him as the Messiah, and they should have. Jesus even told them, if you go back and read the scriptures, you would find that I am who I say I am. But they didn't do that. They didn't recognize this. Now, some of them did, but for the most part, they didn't, because they were so self-absorbed they weren't even obeying what the scriptures teach to begin with. But these Old Testament scriptures, we can go back to even today and find out things about Jesus to help us identify who he is. And in so doing, if you're a Christian, it helps identify who you are. And one such identification is of Jesus as a man of sorrows. That's something that many people do not find appealing. They don't want to be sorrowful. They want to be happy. And there is a happiness in serving Christ, but there's also coupled with it a deep sorrow, a sorrow for the state of man. And so tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss as our text, Isaiah 53 and verse 3, and we're going to see how that applied to Jesus. Isaiah says he was despised. Speaking of Jesus, he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised and we esteemed him not. So this passage clearly points out that Jesus was a man of sorrows. And that's what we're going to talk about this evening. How was Jesus a man of sorrows? Or why was he a man of sorrows? What caused this pain? And so there are 5 points, and I'm sure there's more that we can think of, but there's 5 things that the scriptures show that would cause sorrow for Jesus. And so I thought we would look at these this evening and then also be able to make applications to the life of a Christian, because Christian is doing their best to live their life to exemplify Jesus Christ. And if these things made Jesus sorrowful, then they should make me sorrowful. If anything made Jesus happy, then it should make me happy as well. Uh, we live for Christ. That's the Christian's purpose. We live for Christ. And so we study him and we worship him, we adore him, we hold him with all reverence, so that we can be more like him. That's our aim and that's our goal. So, our first point this evening is betrayed by a friend. We're going to talk about that in just a second. And then we're going to talk about Jesus being falsely accused. We're going to talk about Jesus being abandoned by his disciples. And we will also look how Jesus was rejected by men, and he was also finally crucified. These things caused Jesus to be sorrowful. And so let's go ahead and get into the lesson by talking about Jesus being betrayed by a friend. If you have ever had a friend who betrayed you, then you would understand the pain and sorrow that Jesus felt. A lot of people don't look to Jesus as a friend of Christ, but yet the Bible clearly speaks he wasn't just a friend; he was someone who was very much a dear friend to Jesus. And so I've had this discussion with many before. I thought we would look at some scriptures that show this. The first, and some are just right to the point. But I want to start off with this one because it's one that has a meaning that many people miss. In John 13:18, Jesus had just finished cleaning the feet of the disciples, washing their feet. And he starts to speak of Judas. He says, I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. And it's that phrase, he who ate my bread, meaning there was one whom he held close that he dined with. He gave him of his own food. He thought that highly of him. That's what that phrase is speaking of. Now in Psalms chapter 41 and verse 9, we read, and this again this is a psalm that has to deal with Jesus being betrayed by Judas. And it describes Jesus, and he says, even my close friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted his heel against me. And so notice this was just point blank. Judas was not just a close friend. Jesus trusted him, but yet he was betrayed by him. And so you can imagine the sorrow that Jesus felt knowing that a close, trusted friend betrayed him. And he probably understood very clearly what the outcome of Judas was going to be. And that's a very sad thing. Have you ever known anyone who forsook the Lord or never came to Christ? And then, of course, they passed away from this earth, and you have deep fears of what happened to their soul. It causes you pain, it causes you sorrow, and I'm sure that's exactly what was going through the mind of Jesus. He knew he was being betrayed by this close and trusted friend, and unfortunately, the outcome doesn't look good for Judas. He went and hanged himself, and it's most unfortunate. But Jesus, this hurt him. This hurt him, and I think we can understand why. Um, Matthew chapter 26, I thought we would look at the betrayal. In Matthew chapter 26 of 14 through 16, we read, then one of the 12, whose name was Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, what will you give me if I deliver him over to you? And they paid him 30 pieces of silver. And from that moment, he sought an opportunity to betray him. So for 30 pieces of silver, he betrayed a close and trusted friend for money, all for money. Imagine a close and trusted friend. I hope that you have such a friend. I hope there's someone out there that you think most highly of, that you would think of them as close and trusted. Well, what if you were betrayed by that person for money? Think about that. That's exactly what happened with Jesus. And of course, in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 48 through 50, we see his plan being carried out. It says the betrayer, which was Judas, had given them a sign, and that would have been the soldiers, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man, seize him." And he came up to Jesus at once and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and he kissed him. And Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you came to do." And then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. So here, even at this point, Jesus knew he's calling him friend, and he's being kissed by this close, trusted friend. All for money, all for money. Isn't that sad? And that would cause sorrow. Again, that's something that caused Jesus sorrow. But Judas is not the only one who sought harm for Jesus. Of course, Judas didn't want him to die. Of course, when he found out that he was turned over for death to be crucified, he threw back the money. But needless to say, at that point, it was too late. When you start that type of process, you don't know how it's going to end. And likewise, there were those who falsely accused Jesus, and that can hurt too. I don't know if you've ever been accused by someone falsely, but it's not fair. It's something that many people become upset with. They become angry because they're feeling the effects, they're feeling the punishment, they're feeling the shunning by other people when they haven't done anything worthy of such. And that is exactly what happened to Jesus. After they had taken Jesus, of course, he had to appear before the chief priests and the whole council in Matthew 26 and verse 59 through 61. And what were they wanting to do? Well, they were looking for false testimony against Jesus that they might put him to death, but they couldn't find any. And they said, though many false witnesses came forward, and it said the last two came forward and said, "This man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days." Now, of course, they're using this out of context. Jesus did say that, but it was talking about his flesh and not the temple in Jerusalem. But needless to say, this was what was thrown at them. And it was false testimony because it was taken out of context, as they were always looking to do with Jesus. They were always looking for anything that they could use against him because they didn't want him in their life. And so we see these false witnesses coming forward, and it's not fair. It's not right. But yet, this is what took place. Now, what's really ironic about this passage is these are the ones, the chief priests and council, these people were supposed to be making sure that the Israelites were following the old law, the law of Moses. And in Deuteronomy 19 and verse 18 through 20, it makes it very clear that when there is a disagreement between two over something, and when there's strife between two, then it says the judges shall inquire diligently. And if the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, then you should do to him as he had meant to do to his brother. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and the rest shall hear and fear, and shall never again commit such evil among you, which is a good argument for punishment today by our government. When we have such strict punishments, and that causes other people to fear and not to do the same thing. But needless to say, in this instance, this is what you were supposed to do with a false witness. Now, these false witnesses came up, and it was designed to bring Jesus to death. And once you looked at what they were doing, if this was a false witness, as they were, then instead of Jesus being crucified, they should have been crucified, because that was what was meant for Jesus. And so then we can see they were even forsaking, because the chief priests and council, they did not inquire diligently. They heard what they wanted to hear, and they were looking for such. And so they didn't do this. And so again, Jesus could sit back and say, this isn't fair. And you're not even following the laws that have been delivered that you have sworn to follow. They weren't doing that. So it was very much unfair. And it's definitely something that would cause Jesus to be sorrowful about. But as a Christian, we have to understand that Jesus was willing to receive such type of treatment because he wanted to be able to teach his disciples, and in so doing us, how we are to respond, how he wants us to respond to these false accusations. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, verse 11 through 12, Jesus said, blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And so when he says blessed, he means happy. That doesn't mean you're necessarily happy about what's happening to you, but you know you are content knowing that you're on the right track. This is the same thing they did to the prophets. These kind of thing has happened to righteous people throughout the history of man. And so when they do utter false things about you on the account of Jesus, um, good things will happen to you in the end. You're going to heaven is what's going to happen. Now, it may not be good for you in the short term, but long term, you're going to be with Jesus in heaven, and that's where you want to end up anyway. That's the whole goal of living. Jesus was also a man of sorrows because he was abandoned by his disciples. Now, think about it. Those disciples were the ones that he took special care in teaching, and he spent much time with them. And they experienced so many things with Jesus. He fed the 5,000 and the 4,000. Peter walked on the water with him. They saw Lazarus raised from the dead. All these things they had seen. And in many cases, at least one occasion, one man even swore he never abandoned Jesus. But yet on that night when she was betrayed, they did abandon him. In John chapter 16 and verse 32 and 33, Jesus said, the hour is coming, indeed it has come, when you will be scattered, each to his own home, and will leave me alone. That's right. Jesus was going to be left alone. Those closest to him will abandon him. But he found relief in knowing that he wasn't totally alone. He says, the Father is with me. I have said these things to you that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world. And he did this without the help of man. Man scattered. Man left him alone. It was Jesus with the Father being with him is what enabled him to overcome the world. Now, in Matthew chapter 26 and verses 31 and 33, this is when Peter finds out what he's going to do that night. Jesus said to them, you will all fall away because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. Now he is quoting from Zechariah chapter 13 and verse 7. But then he goes on and say, but after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. And Peter answered him, though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away. Yeah, Peter was just so confident. He was not going to leave the Lord. But yet Jesus goes on to say, Peter, before the cock crows, you'll deny me 3 times. And Peter just couldn't even imagine such a thing happening. But we read about that account. You know, he even cursed and swore to try to mislead people that he was a follower of Jesus. And then we pick up with the final one. And this had to cause pain for Jesus and Peter. But in Luke chapter 22 and 60 and 62, when Peter makes his last denial, we'll just pick up reading there. He says, Peter said, man, I do not know what you are talking about. And immediately while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. He was in the middle of denying Jesus. and the rooster crowed, and the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Oh, can you imagine? Can you imagine the look between Jesus and Peter at that point? And Jesus knew the heart of Peter. He knew the pain that Peter was about to experience. And I'm sure it hurt the Lord. It hurt him knowing that Peter, his faith was still not where it needed to be. I'm sure he wanted to comfort Peter, but he couldn't. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord and how he'd said to him, before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. Yeah, I would have too. I would have wept if I had to look at Jesus's face after denying him 3 times. The very one who experienced so many things. Excuse me. I mean, Peter was the one that walked on the water to Jesus. Can you imagine? And he denied him 3 times, even as far as to curse. Yeah, I'm sure he did go out and wept bitterly, and that caused Jesus much sorrow. Matthew 26, verse 55 and 56 talks about the rest of the disciples. It says, at that hour, Jesus said to the crowds, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? That's when Judas had brought the gang out to capture Jesus. And he says, day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me, but all this is taking place that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. And at that point it says, then all the disciples left him and fled. Yeah, they ran off. So yeah, he was abandoned. It was the Lord and his son Jesus that was going to have to finish that work on this earth. And they had to do it alone. So you can imagine the pain, that sorrow that must have been going through Jesus at that point. He was also rejected by men. The Jewish people, supposedly his people. He was a Jew. Well, I say supposedly because they didn't really claim him as such. Isaiah 53 and verse 3, when we go back to our text, says he was despised and rejected by men. Said he was despised. His own people hated him. And what did he do to deserve such hate? I mean, he healed people everywhere he went. He gave them and brought them good news. He didn't sin. Why was he despised? Well, he was despised because these people loved darkness rather than light. And Jesus shined forth God's light and exposed those dark deeds. In Matthew chapter 27 and verse 21 through 22, Pilate had the opportunity to release one prisoner of the people's choosing that day in celebration of the Passover. And the governor said to them, which of the 2 do you want me to release for you? And they said Barabbas. Now you got to remember, Barabbas was guilty of insurrection. He was guilty of stealing, and he was a murderer. I mean, this is not a good man. And so Pilate said to them, then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ, whom he had already said was innocent? He couldn't find anything wrong with him. And they all said, let him be crucified. That's how much they hated him. They wanted to kill him without a cause. And then in Psalms chapter 22 and verse 6 through 8, a psalm that applies to Jesus, he says, I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind, despised by the people. And all who see me mock me. They make mouths at me. They would open their mouth at him. It was a kind of a sign of derogatory for those people at that time. They wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. And we read about that taking place in Matthew 27 and verse 39. Yes, Jesus was despised by the people. He was rejected by them. They'd rather have Barabbas than Jesus Christ. And so they took him out and crucified him. Think about it. They hung him on a cross and nailed his hands and his feet to that cross, and they just let him die. In John chapter 19 and verse 16 through 18, Jesus was delivered over to the Jews to be crucified. And they took Jesus, and he went out bearing his own cross to the place called the place of skull, in which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. And there they crucified him, and with him two others, one on each side, and Jesus between them. They killed him. They killed the Son of God, one who had no guile in him. He hadn't sinned. He hadn't done anything wrong to the Jews, but they killed him, all because they did not like him. Now, this is not something that Jesus was looking forward to. All the scourging and the way he was going to be treated leading up to his crucifixion. And we read about his prayer in the garden in Luke 22 and verse 41 through 44. I include this under this topic of the crucifixion because it describes the agony in which he anticipated what was about to happen. You know, he had prayed 3 times, Lord, let this cup pass from me, but not my will be done, but your will be done, was his attitude. And it says he withdrew from them, being his disciples, about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and prayed, saying, Father, if you're willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. I mean, this does not sound like someone who wanted to have to experience this, and I don't blame him. I wouldn't want to have to go through that either. Would that cause you to be sorrowful? Yes. I wouldn't want to have to go through this agony. I wouldn't want to have to sweat as great drops of blood. I mean, you can imagine the intensity of the anxiety that he was feeling. But he was going to do that for me and you. And he was willing to do that, to be obedient to the Father. That's something that, you know, he sacrificed himself. Some people would say, well, I'm not doing this. I'm going to go find something I want to do. Well, that wasn't Jesus. Jesus was living for the Father. He lived to please the Father. He lived to fulfill his will. And it was the will of the Father for him to do this. And in Romans 5 and verse 10, when it puts this crucifixion all in perspective, it says, if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son, much more now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life. Now remember, Jesus, we crucified him. We were his enemies at one time. And that would cause pain to know when you're on that cross, that you're hanging on that cross, trying to save people. That's why you're going through what you're going through. The very people who hate you, he was trying to save, and he was willing to die to do it. That would cause great sorrow. He spoke out to the Lord and said, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. He understood the wrath of God that would fall down. Vengeance is mine, the Lord said, I will repay. He knew the danger of the wrath of God. He understands the full force of it. But yet, he did not want to see that happen. He wanted to give man a chance to be reconciled to God. And so he died on that cross in great sorrow, in hope of seeing the best we could be, not knowing if he'd see it, but he hoped to see it. He believed in it that much. Jesus was the man of sorrows, as we talked about. He was betrayed by a friend, a close friend, a trusted friend. He was falsely accused. He was abandoned by his disciples. He was rejected by men. And finally, he was crucified. Now, why do I say all these things? In John chapter 15 and verse 18 through 21, Jesus, in speaking to those who would follow his steps, says, if the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you are of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep yours. But all things they will do to you on account of my name, because they do not know him who sent me. All these things that happened to Jesus can happen and will happen to those who love the Lord and who look for his coming. In Matthew chapter 10 and verse 34 through 36, Jesus says, "Do not think that I've come to bring peace on earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be of those of his own household." You think that doesn't bring sorrow? You think that doesn't hurt? Brings great pain. But if we want to be obedient to Jesus Christ, then we need to be saying the same prayer that Jesus said, "Lord, let not my will be done, but thine be done." It's not easy being a Christian, and it's not a bed of roses. It's not going to be all happiness all the time. Here we labor. Here we go through trials. But there will be a time and a place when God's going to wipe away all tears. And for that, we seek. But until that point, whenever we feel overcome by the grief of following the steps of Jesus, we must look to his word and look at what Jesus did and find strength in that, and not to fall back from our responsibilities, but to gladly forge on, saying, "Here am I, Lord, send me." That's your lesson this evening. I hope you found it beneficial to you. If you're in the Kearney, Missouri area, hey, would you come and visit us? We would love to see you. We meet every Sunday morning at 9:30 for Bible study, 10:30 for worship. And in between there, we're having a thing now we call Kids Bible Time. It's a little 10-minute Bible study for kids. It seems to be working out pretty good. But you can learn all about us by going to kearneychurch.com. We meet at 406 North Clark, and at the website, you can find a map right to the church. And we'd sure hope you would come and meet with us, because we'd love to have you. If you like this lesson and you want to hear more like it, tune in to KPGZ 102.7 FM every Sunday morning at 7 a.m., and you can hear a lesson just like this one from God's Word. Now, if you are outside the Kearney area and you cannot pick up that signal on your FM dial, that's not a problem. You can stream it on your mobile device. Berean Spirits is an internet show I'm a part of with a few other preachers, where we try to study as the Bereans in Acts 17. Each week we tackle a different topic, and you can join in that study and take part in it by going to kearneychurch.com and pressing on the Facebook, the YouTube, or the Berean Spirits app. And then every Thursday morning at 10 a.m., if you join us at that time, we can all try to study the Bible together as iron sharpens iron, trying to gain a better understanding of the topic that we're studying. If you can't join us live, that is not a problem. We leave past episodes up so that you can watch them and learn from them later. Okay, that's all I have for you this evening. Again, I hope it's been beneficial to you. Give us a like, share it, and we'll see you again, Lord willing, this Thursday at 7 p.m. Until then, remember, this is the day the Lord has made. Let's rejoice in it and be glad.
This has been Gospel Preaching Live. Join us each week as truth is taught, faith is examined, and beliefs are challenged. Be sure and hit the like button so you can be notified of future episodes. And to watch past episodes, go to our website, kearneychurch.com. This has been a work of the Kearney Church of Christ.